I'm going to call this work session to order. And this one's on AO 2020-2 and 2019-136 relating to life safety access roads. Let's do introductions, starting with UP.
Pete Peterson.
Austin Davidson, but I'm leaving.
Crystal.
Oh, sorry, Crystal Kennedy.
John Weddle.
Got confused. Alex Hall.
Forrest Dunbar.
Suzanne LeBrand.
Felix Rivera. Dean. Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
Bill Paulson, Ingrid Municipal Man.
All right. Okay, so this was a work session that was requested based on a letter that was sent to us by Ms. Osiander, W. Osiander, former Assembly member. And I invited Ms. Osiander to be here today, but she could not because of personal family reasons. So I guess I will turn it over to Ms. Kennedy to sort of set the frame for the discussion, and then we can have it back and forth.
Okay, thank you, and I'll do my best here. I guess what happened here was bringing up the question of really whether or not we could actually do what the ordinance that we have passed says we are going to do, and that is in regard to making an area-wide, I shouldn't say change, but have an area-wide bond for area-wide road projects that basically would essentially supersede the authority and jurisdiction of our individual road boards. So what it came down from Ms. Osiander was basically a no, we cannot, that we are precluded from both the charter and code from actually taking that kind of an action because those actions for road construction and maintenance are actually given by the authority of the voters in those separate districts. So it's kind of one of those that, at least from my perspective, and certainly from Debbie Osiander's perspective, and from the road board there, who is kind of, they kind of backtracked a little bit too and said, oh yeah, wait a minute, can we really do this? And how does it impact the authority of our local road boards that are voter approved? So I don't have an answer, just have a lot of questions, and very concerned about how we actually, or if we can do this without impacting the authority and jurisdiction of our local road boards.
Thank you. So we don't have copies of it here, but Bill, have you seen that letter?
I have seen that letter, Mr. Chair. I will tell you, I haven't built a formal response. I was hoping that Osiander may have been here today. Maybe she'll be at the Assembly meeting on Tuesday. But I can pass along for the Assembly's consumption that I have no doubt about the legality of what the Assembly already passed last fall. And we can retrace the bidding if we're interested in doing that. But there's now an established practice of exercising the Charter's authority from 1975 that says as long as we're operating in an area-wide mode, all legislative power is reserved to the Assembly. The examples that we have all rehearsed over the last few years are initially, when the municipality came into existence, we had a library service area. In 1978, the Assembly said, that's silly, we're just winking it out of existence. And by a simple vote of the Assembly, we said we're moving beyond the service area concept in total. The library service area is defunct and doesn't do anything anymore. Now we just do it as an area-wide basis. In the early 80s, we had, at the Charter in 1975, we had said there were two area-wide powers that we were only exercising in service areas. One was building safety service area, which is one that we talked about from the earthquake, where we only enforce our building code in a small portion of town. And the other was sewerage. We were only going to exercise sewerage in an area-wide, in a service area. And then in the early 80s, we decided we'd outgrown that. We're not doing that anymore. Sewerage is now area-wide. The first step that we took into this area in the modern era was the highway law enforcement, where we had police service areas that stopped at Beachview Creek, and we had the Girdwood Valley service area, which had adopted police powers, but we still had a need to do something on the Seward and Glen highways. And we said we have matured past what the service areas are able to do for us, and so we're going to take that thread area-wide. So we'll have an area-wide power that is still supported by service areas. In the same vein here, what we retraced when we were in the work session in the fall was that we had rediscovered the problem of many areas in town that are not serviced by two adequate fire access roads. And we had discovered that after the McHugh Creek fire, which if the winds had blown in a different direction could have been a very bad scene. When we rediscovered it, we learned that that had been a part of the Hillside District Plan in 2007. And then shortly thereafter discovered there had been a whole study group impaneled in 2005 and 2006 for the Chugach Eagle River Birchwood area that again said this is a significant problem that requires some resources. What we said in the work session was the only way we had been making any forward progress, to the extent we had been making forward progress since rediscovering this problem every year, was to rely on state grants. But there have been no state grants for road construction the entire time we have been here, and there is not likely to be any road construction state grants. So our pitch at the time was to say, seeing Australia burn, we understand that there are portions of the municipality we have recognized to be in this precarious place. It's time to actually make forward progress on this. So let's declare the construction of life safety access roads to be an area-wide functioning municipality. That doesn't eliminate any of the service areas. The service areas are still completely in charge of their own mill levies, of their own budgets, and their own maintenance operations. In practice, if we were to build a new area life safety access road in an area that is currently being serviced by a service area, it's almost a certainty that we would contract for that service area to perform maintenance operations and give them a check that they don't otherwise already have to maintain those new functions. I think it is true to say that this model has moved us a step further beyond the service area model that we have had. But as I say, I'm completely comfortable with its legality, and I'm comfortable with it as a public policy matter because the service areas had proven incapable of solving this problem. So to the extent we are interested in solving this problem, this is, as I understand it, the only option that we have. Moreover, it is only going to be exercised as an area-wide power through an affirmative vote of the people. So we had said before, we will declare this to be an area-wide power, but it will largely be an on-the-books power, unless and until the voters say that we can spend some money on this. I guess going all the way to the bitter end, then the last point I'll make is, in practice, I understand how this does cause some blending. So right now, if you're in the Chugach Birchwood Eagle River service area, in some ways you have a complete fiefdom in that you pay only for the things that you are totally interested in, and likewise if you're in the Anchorage Roads and Drain Service area, you're paying only for your things. Now, because we have said we are stronger together and need to solve this problem together, we will all solve this problem together. In practice, I suspect that means that we are going to be subsidizing Chugach Birchwood Eagle River for the foreseeable future. The Chugach Eagle River Birchwood area is about 11 or 12% of the total assessed value of the municipality. So for every dollar that the voters say that we can have to build a life safety access road, 11 cents will come from Chugach Eagle River Birchwood, and the bulk will come from everywhere else. In the current proposal, if Chugach Birchwood Eagle River service area had said we would like to finally build the Kohlberg connection, which is the one that we proposed, they would have had to find $500,000 for design. As a package, it's $500,000 for the Kohlberg, $500,000 for the Boundary Road, and $100,000 I think it is for Mountain Air. So a total package of around $1.1 million. Chugach will pay around $100,000 of that. So instead of the $500,000 option, we're giving them the $100,000 option. I suppose it is the case that there's a concern that they won't have adequate input into how those packages are constructed going forward. But I do think we can give folks some confidence that the two areas of our municipality that seem most in need of this service are the Hillside and Chugach Eagle River Birchwood, because those are the places that have been historically studied and where we have a whole list of projects. There's certainly going to be other places that will be involved over time. Girdwood certainly has a significant issue, but that's one that probably only gets solved with federal funding. And I do think that as we have now matured into this, that we're going to task AMATs with helping us do some studies so that we can give a real, in the 2040 plan, we can say that we're going to do a comprehensive study of all the missing connections and start to rank order them. But the equity concerns, I think, can be worked out in the political process and will sort of take care of themselves. I'm happy to answer any further questions, but that I think is the best I know for putting out. Other than, I do want to say, Gum He Fat Choi to everyone, because I think it provides a professional challenge to the translators. Happy Year of the Rat.
Spell those words for us?
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Gates?
I feel like I should ask Mr. Fossey some tough question now in return for that. But I really just wanted to add, I agree with the sort of use case for the assembly adding this area-wide power. I did take a look at the legal ramifications or authority. So I agree with Mr. Fossey said. But I just wanted to add one distinction here. So in the states, I think that our authority to add an area-wide power by an assembly action is because we're home rule municipality, the legislative powers, so they're regulated by law. And in contrast, if suppose Mrs. Oceana were talking to people from that borough, other boroughs, first-class boroughs, second-class boroughs, they have to have an election to acquire an area-wide power. So there's a distinction between different government structures, and we as a home municipality, the assembly, your duty and your due diligence in vetting an ordinance to decide if it should acquire an area-wide power or not, but it's all by a vote of the assembly.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, make sure I got this right. So, the costs will be reimbursed or supported by all the citizens of the municipality, and municipality will probably contract with the road service district who works with the contractor to do the work, and that the citizens, through whatever they may be, their community councils or whatever, will have a chance to have input and review the plans and stuff.
So, through the chair, top line answer is yes. I can't imagine why we wouldn't say to Mark Littlefield, you already have contractors who are maintaining roads, and vice versa. We just built an area-wide road. Why don't we just give you a check and have your contractor do it? I don't know why. We would never deploy somebody from Midtown to do that.
No, yeah.
And then on the how we're building these bonds, in some ways the answer is the same process we used to build every area-wide bond, the same public process that happens in the assembly chambers. But I think the better answer is we're going to do some real scoop and study that really says these are the missing connections in the order of priority. So there should be some process there. I'm looking at the line. You give me an affirmative head shake, so that's good.
Yeah, and all right, and I just encourage you, I haven't looked at the map, but access to the wilderness areas is a huge issue all over the community, and there may be some opportunities there. And then in general, just think of all the superlatives I've said about Mr. Falls and what a good job he's doing it. Multiplied by 2.
That's great. Mr. Weddleton?
So I don't have Debbie's letter in front of me, but I read it. And I thought she had pointed out some part of the charter that said a road service members or road service area members don't have to pay for any other road in the municipality. Right. And if that's the case, then you've got a clash. Yes, we can make an area-wide power, but it says in there they don't have to pitch in for others. How do you get around that?
So through the chair, I'll try to see if I can fish out her letter. Maybe we can even walk through it together. But my recollection was that she was citing to a piece of the Title 27 Service Area Code, which was describing how service areas work, not a piece of the charter.
Not in the charter.
So as long as we're adopting an ordinance that says, hey, this is now an area-wide power, that those provisions that are governing the service areas are not relevant.
Just follow up briefly. So were that the case, one, we could change the code. 2, maybe make clear with a whereas added to this bond or something saying, notwithstanding that part of code, just to say, okay, we acknowledge that. I mean, does that seem proper and fair?
We can certainly do something along those lines.
Okay, but that was in code, not in charter.
There's both. But
Okay.
I'll get to
Go
it.
ahead.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. Just to comment on that last comment that Mr. Weddleton had in regard to how do we put some kind of a sentence or something in there to craft that this doesn't somehow negate or supersede the authority of our local road boards. But I would agree to that and would appreciate doing something like that. But there's 2 things. So in in the municipal code, under Article 9, I believe it is, I'm getting there. So, yeah, the service area and assessment districts. It talks about a service area may be created, altered, or abolished only with the approval of a majority of those voting on the question within the area affected. So that's pretty, I don't know, to me that's pretty straightforward, that what we're trying to do is alter the function of a service area that we may not have the ability to do, because those service areas, when they're created, are given that those parameters by which to work in. The other thing I would point out is that a lot of the precedents that you referred to was in the 70s and that, and was way before this particular, at least the road board for Chugiak, Birchwood, Eagle River was actually authorized. So I hate to, look at that kind of past precedent, because obviously something happened after that that said, no, we'd rather do it this way, and that's why we've created the service areas that we have. The other section to look at that really kind of makes me question all of this is in Chapter 27, specifically 0.10.050, and it's in Section B. And there's a line in there that says, where is it? I was just looking at it. No work shall be performed except in accordance with the approved service area budget and contracts. Any obligation incurred otherwise is void. What do we do with that? Because again, that goes back to protecting the jurisdiction and authority of the road board and their board of supervisors, who are supposed to make these decisions based on their input, the way they've come up with these projects. And I think that's probably the crux of all of this, that Debbie says really steps on the toes of Subursa, because they do have their project list. They do have their funding mechanism, and this somehow would begin to erode, this ordinance, or actually, the ordinance that was passed to allow this life safety mechanism for bonding would begin to erode something that already says that, in code is protected. So that's, to me, that's the rub, that's the crux of the issue. Anyway, that's the big legal question. The second part of it, and one of Birchwood Community Council's concern, is that none of this went through the real public process. And I think, and granted, I was part of that as well, where I'm calling the road board supervisor and saying, hey, what road out there do we have that you would target? And then we have the Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department Chief Benningfield, who weighed in on that and said, hey, here's a couple of places that we know are somewhat problematic, and that there would be an advantage to having a road connection for egress during a fire event. And but anyway, those two people weighed heavily into that conversation, and so I was thankful that they did, that they had some feedback on that. But the point is, there was no other real public conversation with Birchwood Community Council, Chugiak Community Council, and these roads that have these major issues are kind of in that area. But we didn't, other than even there was an emergency meeting like 2 days before Christmas of the supervisors, the road board supervisors, to say, hey, can we use this road as our token road that we'll throw in here, and identify as one that could use some life safety connection. So even the people on that have now come back and said, how did all that happen? How did we get here? Basically recognizing kind of what this really means in the long run, or short term, either way. So anyway, it's a lot of questions. It's not necessarily confusing, but I think it is a legal issue, and it's certainly a community input issue. So.
Which, if I can hazard some responses to those, I think there are questions, but they're all answerable, and so if I'll step through them serially. First is the charter. Senator Kinney is absolutely right. The charter has an Article 9. It governs service areas and assessment districts, and it creates the rules as service area may be created, altered, or abolished only with the majority of those voting on the question of the area affected. But this proposal, which we passed in the fall, was not an exercise of that. It was instead an exercise of the home rule power to legislate area-wide by a majority vote of the assembly members. And there, the precedents from 1975 going forward give us good comfort that we have done it correctly. In the same way that we abolished the area-wide, the library service area and took libraries area-wide, we didn't send that to the voters. In the same way that we had a sewage service area and we superseded it by declaring the sewage power to be area-wide, we didn't send that to the voters. When we took the law enforcement power area-wide, we didn't have to send that to any kind of voters. And every part of the ordinance that we passed leaves all of the service areas in their places doing everything that they were doing before. So there is no real difference, and we might come to them and say, hey, Mark Littlefield, we would love to pay you some new money that you did not raise from a subversive mill levy to have your contractor plow this new road we're creating. And they may well say no, and then we'll pay for it some other way. So I'm comfortable that we are consistent with the charter here. We have good pattern and practice for that. There is another provision of code which lives in Title 27 under General Authority and Procedures for the Service Areas. It's called 1050 Operation of Limited Road Service Areas. So it doesn't apply when you're exercising an area-wide power. But it says that when you have a limited road service area that has a board of supervisors, B is supposed to prepare and submit a budget. It's supposed to accept in emergencies, go with all the Title VII procurement rules. And then finally, the punchline, no work shall be performed except in accordance with approved service area budgets and contracts, and other obligations are void. What that's saying is that service areas are only required to pay for the things that they have appropriately procured. It doesn't say that there is an exclusive fiefdom that is granted to service areas that prevents any kind of exercise of area-wide power. And to the extent it could even be read that way, the Assembly's action declaring this to be the area-wide power would be the general rule that is going over the specific rule. So again, I'm comfortable that we can answer all of those questions, that we have complied with the charter, that there isn't a code provision that we need to worry about. And again, I understand the practical concern that we are now sort of playing in the sandboxes that have been historically more cordoned off. But the description that Senator Kennedy gave for how we did it this go-round, I think, provides a preview of how it's likely to go down for the foreseeable future, which is, in the first instance, we didn't sit in Tudor Elmore and say, what road should we pick in Chugach Eagle River? We called Mark Littlefield, the staff supervisor at the Chugach Birchwood Eagle River Service Area, and said, what would you guys like? We called Chief Benningfield at the Chugach Volunteer Fire Department, and we looped in the assembly members. As for a public process, it is true we didn't run anything specifically through community councils, and maybe that was a failing, but I'll say this had sort of more extraordinary public involvement than the typical ordinance in the fact that we had reached out both to the Subversa board staff, ultimately asked the Subversa board to weigh in itself, looped in the volunteer fire department, and then ran this through the normal course of introduction and action in the fall with a promise that there was going to ultimately be another bond proposition coming forth now. So I guess where I start and where I end is that I still feel like, sort of heaven forbid, something terrible actually happened, and we said, how do we not address this? Knowing that I feel like we have a potential solution to start cracking away at this problem, it would not leave me in a comfortable place to say, well, we had a way of solving this, but we didn't trust each other enough to sort of work together. So we wanted to maintain our sort of exclusive domains, and I don't think that will be satisfying anyway. So I'm still comfortable that we have arrived at a legal solution, and I think it's the one that's practical, and we'll sort of leave it at that.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I don't think that it has anything to, I don't think it's an ill will thing or anything, or anybody's accusing somebody of having done something. I think it's really the idea that taxpayers know that they pay for a certain kind of service, that our road board is representational of different community councils and that. And now there's going to be a bond that says, well, we already know you pay a certain amount of tax for this road, but now you're going to pay for a road on the other side of town, kind of a thing. So there is a sense that, well, wait a minute, we're already taking care of ourselves here. Why are we being drawn into this bigger picture? And the other part of it is there were about half a dozen roads that could have qualified the way Colberg Road is. So I think that's the community pushback, is that they would have liked to have had a conversation that was really one that said, well, okay, we know of all these choices here, which one really should be the priority? And so the pushback in terms of, it wasn't about, you know, whether or not there would be some kind of a mishap and somebody would be caught without having done something that they could have done, but was that actually the best choice of all the options that were out there? I think you know, in Mr. Weddleton's area, there's one road that has stood out for a long time that needed some kind of help. And in our community, that's not been the case. And so there were other people that said, well, wait a minute, why wasn't my road considered for this, or the road at the end of my road? So anyway, so that's where some of that pushback is coming from, that we didn't get the chance to really vet that very well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Alito?
Thanks. So this kind of goes to the choice, or what, like, and the timing of this. Why are we bonding for this right now when AMATS is going to do a study? So why is there a rush to put it on this bond? Is it just because we've kind of identified these roads and why not get started, or is there some other thing that's extremely pressing?
So, through the chair, partly the answer is because it is now an answer to a long festering problem, and we may as well get started fixing it. Another answer is that we have had the Mountain Air Federal Match programmed in the Transportation Improvement Plan for quite some time, and it is listed in 2020 as $1 million. So we would like to draw down the Mountain Air money. And the last answer is that by looking at the 2005-2006 study for Chugiak Eagle River, and by looping in the fire department, we had some good confidence that if Colberg is not the first road that you would choose, it's in the top 5. And it seemed within the realm of possibility. And likewise, with the boundary extension, we asked our fire department to give us a list of places where they have encountered issues in the past and that feel like, again, if you were to do the full study, would make it into the top 10, that was the one that we selected. So I agree, we should have a fuller process to help inform this for the next go-round, but we wanted to get started and solve the problem. We wanted to draw down the federal money, and we felt like we were certainly close to the optimum answer if we hadn't actually done the optimum answer.
My follow-up question to that is there any way to, bond counsel would hate these words, but to make the bond language squishier so that if Chugiak Eagle River doesn't want a road or something, or if we get hung up for some reason, that we can move on to the next road on the list?
Through the chair, I'm going to pull that language up now.
I think names it by name.
Will want the road, otherwise then they will be subsidizing the rest of us instead of receiving a subsidy from us. But I pulled up the language here. My recollection is this one is written in the same manner as the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service Area Bond, which says if any of the projects prove impracticable, then a light project can be accepted. Let me see if I can give you that chapter and verse in real time.
While you look that up, Mr. Dunbar?
Sure, and I have to go, I apologize. But so, you know, my concern with this ordinance from the beginning has been the degree to which the denser part of towns, and that also happen to be some of the poorer parts of towns like East Anchorage, Fairview, UMed to a certain degree, although that's wealthy as well, will be subsidizing Eagle River and Chugiak and the hillside. And what we've heard today is Eagle River Chugiak has about 11 to 12% of our taxable value. I think on this bond they're getting something like 25 to 30% of the value of this bond, and I think we'd expect that number to probably increase given the number of eligible roads out there. Now, if they're saying even that isn't a good enough deal for us because we're still, you know, paying for somebody out there, is there a way to exercise? And let's say it also fails. Let's say the bond fails this time because people in Eagle River Chugiak vote massively against it. For the hillside, I doubt you'd get the same turnout. Maybe not. I mean, I think it's in their comprehensive plan, so maybe they're more amenable to it. But is there a way to exercise our citywide power, but cut out Eagle River Chugiak so that we don't have to subsidize them anymore, and they can vote against or vote for their own life safety emergency roads?
Chair, I think the right answer to your question is no. If you want to treat everybody in the municipality equally, then you can legislate. If you want to treat people differently, you have to ask people to opt into a different tax treatment. that is the service area concept. So if you wanted to say, we're drawing a line from J-Bear South, and we're going to take care of the life safety there, then there would be a different proposition where we said, maybe create a Anchorage Bowl and South life safety access road service area.
Yeah, but I mean, we could theoretically, let's say that the bond fails massively because people in Greenwich got vote against it. We might want to come back with another proposal and say, the people of the hillside and the people of Arsda will work on this together, and they don't want to be a part. That's fine.
That is a possibility. And then back to Assemblyman Rosalto's question, I believe this language is inherited directly from the traditional arts of bond, but this one now also contains on line 20 on page 2. If the approved projects have been completed in whole or in part, or their completion is to be provided for, or their completion is found to be practical, the municipality may apply the bond proceeds or any portion thereof to other municipal public safety and human capital projects. I think I got that one.
Okay.
Thank you. To the list. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure all you're gonna be here long after I'm done. These kind of issues will keep coming up. And we've gotta fight through them. There'll always be some objections. This one here is a bit different. Once you throw in there it's life safety, it's firefighting and ambulance, then having the people who are involved in that designate this road, because they're the ones that have to get out there to rescue people or fight a fire. That kind of raises it up above just the local and the provincial sorts of things, and I think validly so. And I always forgive me for repeating myself, but we've seen this in years past when a subdivider couldn't have good enough soils to get water. Right. So they put in a subdivision pump and well and so on and so forth. 15, 20 years later, they weren't maintaining it. The city ended up assuming that. Not the ideal solution. 2 years ago, 2.5, so there was flooding on Peters Creek. Guess what? That drainage is state jurisdiction. Guess what? The state organization that could administer that and do something, it disappeared due to funding. So the call I just got happened in Forest Park.
Yes.
Flooding there and so on and so forth. Our road service guys are out there, or the fire guys, making sure they can get across it. I guess the road service guys are going to sand the glacier, and so on. But those are we're where the buck stops, for all these sorts of things. And there'll always be some people that are upset. But our job is to look at the bigger picture, and so on. And I'm sorry, I'm preaching. But what I said is profoundly true.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, just point on the mountain air that's on here. That's not in a road service area, so some of these issues don't really apply.
Yeah, and that's
Makes
what
it
that
cleaner.
confuses.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And quick question for Ms. Kennedy. In your conversations with the road service folks, have they suggested an alternative to how life safety roads would be handled in your area?
Well, yeah, I mean, if it was really raising itself to the level that the supervisors wanted to deal with it, they would. I mean, they have capital, that they would prioritize with any other road out there. And like I said, there's probably about half a dozen that rise to that level of needed attention. But it hasn't, I guess, risen quite to the level of where it's considered an emergency. So.
Okay, and just, thanks, that's helpful. So they feel like they have the resources, capital-wise, to build any extra infrastructure within the road service area that would be needed.
If they decided it was an emergency, yes, yeah. But, it's also, it was interesting listening to like the PM&E conversation, because you're talking about how your local roads are the ones that end up with getting local funding or state funding, and collector roads get the state funding. We're kind of where whatever you said on there, we're the opposite. We fund our local roads at the local level, And then when we're looking at bigger projects, then we look for state grants. So this is on a hillside, it's on a very steep hillside, so it's going to be quite a project. So it would be one of those that they would want to look first at state grants, but since that's beginning to be far and few between, they're going to probably have to rethink how they prioritize some of these and look at how to use their capital. So,
Thank you. All right, any other questions or comments?
no, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Kennedy, are you going to get anything else before the vote on Tuesday?
I think if there was some kind of a statement that said something about this was not in any way, shape, or form intended to minimize the authority or jurisdiction of local road boards, that would be helpful. I don't know exactly what that language looks like, but anyway.
I'll move the amendment.
Whatever it is.
I mean, would a resolution come from us or anything?
I don't know. I mean, that's my question is what is the mechanism there? Because now we're mucking around with bond language, which will make everybody's head explode. So, anyway.
I think we can make that suggestion.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you.
don't want exploding heads. Sorry.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if Mr. Lyon had any comments after sitting and listening to this conversation for the last 45 minutes. Any input?
I don't really have anything to add, really. I mean, as I said earlier, we always have the local match requirement, and in the years past, if it's outside of ARTSA, we just haven't, it's been ranked and scored at the bottom, because we know it can just sit in there and ruin our program and just be a giant hole. So now that we have this opportunity to add match for different projects, that's a great way to continue funding in other parts that we haven't been able to do before.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
You used the phrase ruin our program, but that's because the fiscal constraint, right? So we have this dollar project in there that we don't think will ever really be done because we can't get the match.
Yeah, I mean,
That's your issue.
so through the chair, if we put,
Like a lot of those
if we have
giant
Mountain Air in there with $1 million in
Right.
2020, and we have no way of coming up with the match,
Right.
we get farther into 2020, and we say, okay, now this is going to slip. Where are we going to
Yeah.
put this $1 million? And then later on, we have 2.5 for design. It's like, okay, now it's going to slip. So ruin or put a hole in your program. We just, hoops that we have to jump through to try and figure out what other project can take this amount of money, because you can't have new projects in easily, but what project that's currently in the program can we move that money into?
That's what ruin means.
Ruin my
Thank
life.
you.
It just looks bad.
Turn it into an acronym. All right.